Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for coming to our Tuesday webinar. There's a number of you here, and it's nice to have you all here today. This webinar is going to be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Today's topic is community profiles. So I'm Lena. I'm one of the librarians with Library Development Services, and on the line is my coworker Jessica.
Hi, everyone.
She'll be monitoring the chat and answering your questions throughout. And we'll get started right away. Just a few housekeeping things. There are two handouts in this webinar. I'm not exactly sure where the handouts are located on your screen, but I have my slides there and also the example of a community profile template that you guys can download and use. And if you can't get on or find those handouts, just let us know. We'll email them to you after the webinar. So let's get started. Everybody can see my screen all right. Jessica's already confirmed for me.
Yeah, you look great, Lena.
Great. Okay, so we're going to get moving then. So what is a community profile? A community profile is basically just information about your community. It includes things like demographics, resources, partnerships, and needs of your community. So demographics, statistical information, resources that are available for your patrons within the community and for yourself, partnerships that you've established with other organizations, and particular needs of your community. So today's webinar is going to cover how to gather some of this information from various online resources as well as within your community. So why would you make a community profile? I hope some of you have this idea in mind right now, and that's why you signed up for this webinar. But the biggest reason to make a community profile is to develop a good sense of your community. This will bring you, gathering all this information will bring you awareness of people or groups that are different from you, because it's very easy to imagine that our library users are a lot like us. It'll give you ideas about the different minority groups that you serve, special interests of your community, and different age groups within your community. It will give you an awareness of the services in your community that you don't typically use. So, you might not use the food bank, but it's a service available in your community, and it's good to know how to direct people there. You probably know about that one already since you are all very knowledgeable about your communities. But another example would be support groups that are in the community for particular issues or topics. Another good reason to make a community profile is having a community profile ready will help you work in a way that supports the community, town, or county, whichever you're a part of. It'll help you in relationship building with other organizations and services to support each other's work and not compete or duplicate efforts. It will help you communicate your rationale for asking for funding to your city, town, or county. You'll have data ready to go at your fingertips when you're asked to communicate your rationale for funding, and you will have expert knowledge of your community. This is especially important if you don't live there. I know sometimes it can be hard to feel like you have credibility or you have information when you go to a town council and you're not a resident. There can be a bit of tension there. So having the community knowledge and having those numbers with you will be really helpful in helping you feel confident in advocating for your library services. And finally, having a community profile will help you with strategic planning for services. It'll help you identify who's already well served in the community by other organizations and what groups are underserved perhaps in the community that the library could fill a gap in aiding. And our last reason to make a community profile is it will help you with long-term planning. It'll help your library be proactive and not reactive to changing demographics. So for example, you'll be able to see you have a large cohort of children between the ages of 0 and 5. You can plan for those kids moving up through the years and know that that group will continue to swell as they get older. It will help you with goal setting, creating achievable goals that are relevant to your community. And finally, it'll help you adjust to change. So a great example is the pandemic we're going through now. Having that demographic information will help you really realize where those gaps are going to be in your community, whether it's going to be people who are going to be jobless looking for work, if you have a community that has a lot of working age people, or it could be seniors who need other ways to connect with the library during this pandemic, who may not be technologically savvy. And some of the resources we're going to look at will actually give you that information. So when I was planning for this webinar, I did a lot of reading. And one of the documents I found, I linked a website here. It had a figure in there that I thought was quite a good process for developing a community profile. Now, this is not necessarily library specific. This was for any group working in the community. So some of it's a little bit more detailed than what we might need, but I'm going to go through this 4-step model with you and talk about where you find this information at each step. So the first thing I want to highlight about this model is you begin by reviewing social and economic characteristics of your community, because those characteristics are going to inform your community's issues and attitudes, and they're going to also inform the area features or services that are in that community. So you can see how those little arrows go from social and economic characteristics out to both of those. And those two things also inform each other and affect what is in your community. Then the final step of the model is to summarize your findings, which ironically is misspelled on this model. Drives me a little bit crazy, but we'll talk about summarizing your findings, and it doesn't have to be a formal report as it would be in this model. It can be what suits your community's needs. Any questions so far, Jessica?
No, there's been nothing. And just a reminder to the participants, you can use your questions function to add questions or comments at any time. So I'm here answering them, and I know Lena will pause and answer questions throughout. So please feel free to ask, everyone.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll dive into the model and where we can find some of these things. So bear with me. I'm going to be kind of clicking in and out of my presentation to show you some web pages. So sorry that this is so blurry. It was not a very high resolution picture. It looks better if you print this off as a handout. But the first one, review social and economic characteristics such as demographics, growth trends, labor force, major employers, and housing. So the best place for you to find this information is going to be Stats Canada. And they have a particular publication called Focus on Geography, where they take all that complicated data and they summarize it in something that's very simple and easy to read. So the example I have here is for Parkland County. So I'm just going to exit out of my presentation and show you guys Parkland County's Focus on Geography series, so you know what I'm talking about. And if you click on that link in my presentation, you could just click back here to Focus on Geography series, or you could click here and type in a new place and it would find it for you. So it has summarized demographic information and some highlights here that you could pull out and put into a little report that would be good for you to know. Again, more comparisons to other nearby communities. So the first page isn't as exciting, but if you click this little drop-down menu, you can see it includes all the demographic information we might want to include in a report like this. The age and sex of the population will give you an idea if you have any large groups of demographics that you're going to have to plan for now and in the future. Types of dwellings, marital status, and different types of households, different languages that people are speaking in your community, income, immigration, so where people are coming from when they move to your community, housing, Aboriginal peoples, so the different Indigenous groups that, or people who identify as Indigenous who may be living in your community, the education of your residents, different education levels, the labor sectors that they work in, and then this one's really interesting, last one, journey to work, is the length of people's commutes. So, you know, it'll tell you whether your residents are commuting to farther communities or staying close to home for work. So this is where I would suggest everyone start if they're looking at creating a community profile. So the next thing I'm going to show you that's on this slide is the Environics Prism lookup. So that's my next page here. You can see here, if you came to this website, something that's really cool is they're actually updating Prism, because right now it uses a program called Flash, which will be discontinued in December. So for now, Prism works really well in Google Chrome. After December, it's going to look a little different, but they're actually doing a launch event on May 21st, a webinar about the new Prism, which I'm going to attend. I think it's going to be really helpful. So I'd recommend that you guys sign up for that. If you just Google Prism, P-R-I-Z-M, you'll find it. So one of the things you have to do is make sure that Flash is enabled. And it's not going to work for me today. Let's just refresh the page. Oh, technical difficulties. It should work best in Google Chrome. And it should be appearing right here. It was working earlier today. Let me just open it in a new tab and see if that does anything fun for us. Got Flash enabled. There we go. Okay. So you saw I went to this little lock here to enable Flash to make sure that it works here. So first thing you're going to do is enter your postal code. And I have the postal code for the Onaway area memorized because it's a really easy one. And let's look up some Environics Prism data about this area. So it actually gives me a bunch of communities that are in that area. So we'll stick with Alberta Beach. They're the first ones here. Now you might be wondering where Prism or Environics gets their information from. These are, you know, when you get phone calls to do surveys over the phone, it's often people who are working for organizations like this. So they're gathering demographic data about the different people who live in this community, and not just the demographics, but also identifying some of the values and consumer behaviors of these groups. So we can see that in Alberta Beach, they belong to group number 58, rustic roads, they're called, rural, lower middle income, older couples. So some interesting facts here about the education, occupation, cultural diversity index, and a sample social value is attraction to nature. So in general, again, we're speaking in generalities, people in this area, they value nature and have an attraction to living in nature. So we can click on the bottom here on a couple of different things. The most interesting is going to be how they think. So this will talk a little bit about some of the values and attitudes of community members, again, in general. So here they score strong for technology anxiety, pragmatic with their purchases. Brands don't typically factor into their purchasing decisions. So obviously, if you were a retail outlet, you would want to know things like that. For libraries, maybe less important, except for, you know, things about technology anxiety, we would want to know that. Where they live is not so important because it usually points to someplace in Ontario or Eastern Canada. But how they live is really interesting. So here it has some sample attitudes of people who live in this area, and then some areas, some consumer demographic information about where they would shop and what they would like to do in their leisure time, things like that. So very interesting in getting a sense of your community right off the bat. So let me pull up my PowerPoint again. Current slide. Okay. So we'll go on to the next part of the community profile. So the next part would be identify community issues and attitudes. You're going to know some of this information, especially if you live in the community or if you've worked there for a long time. But again, the Prism lookup that we just saw gives you some ideas about attitudes in the community, needs assessment surveys from previous plans of service. You might find information there. And then I'll just mention this, other publications your municipality or county has created. So the example I had here was when I was looking at Parkland County's website, they had a variety of studies and plans and reports that the county had actually commissioned around all sorts of things, needs assessments around leisure and recreation. They had land use assessments, and they're lengthy documents, but they were really revealing about community attitudes and needs and interests. So if you can find that information, I think it's really worth reading. Now, the thing I'm going to show you on this slide that I think is the coolest is the Alberta Community Health Dashboard. Now, I'm going to just get out of my PowerPoint again. This website works best in Firefox, and I have the link there. This is basically a dashboard put together by Alberta Health Services to assess cancer risk in people in different communities. So you can see here, I did the same search for that on-away postal code, which brought up quite a large swath of territory, Westview excluding Stony Plain and Spruce Grove. So this is kind of the Parkland County area, plus some other areas as well. So it's got demographic information again, cancer statistics for this area. Oh, and it's going to reload. Just as a warning, this is quite a slow, or can be quite a slow website to load. I actually took some screenshots in case we had technical difficulties, but I'll try to show it to you live. So now it's reset and just showing us Alberta in general, but I'll search that postal code again. But here it shows some statistics of different types of cancers that people might get. This is interesting for us, but what's really interesting is the risk factor tab here. So again, loading very slowly, but this risk factor tab is going to show us common risky behaviors that would increase somebody's cancer risk. You might use this information to inform support groups you might host in your library, programs, pamphlets, brochures, or even parts of your nonfiction collection that you might bring in. So let's try that Parkland County postal code again and have it load slowly. Very, very slowly. So what is nice about this color coding here is if it's blue, that number is actually better than the provincial average. Green, they're right on par with the provincial average, and red means they're worse than the provincial average. So in this area, Westview, excluding Stony Plain and Spruce Grove, high risk activities or high health risks in this area are sunburn in the last year and insufficient physical activity. So seeing this in particular, this might make me think about bringing some physical activity programming into my library and providing that information, those outlets in the library, maybe highlighting that collection, since that appears to be a community health need. If we scroll down, again, you can kind of see where on this other little infographic where people stand. So blue is better than provincial average. So lucky residents of Westview have less stress than the rest of Alberta on average, have more sufficient fruit and veggie consumption than the rest of Alberta on average, less heavy drinking than the rest of Alberta on average. So very interesting health information here for a variety of different services. I know my dad works in social services. He was interested in this as well. And then again, lots of information about the Alberta Community Health Survey, interesting things about barriers to healthcare access. So sometimes there's things you can do about this as a library, sometimes not, but it's good for you to know kind of what's going on. And there are interesting sections in here about poverty. Really, really interesting here is the age people first experience homelessness in this community. So of those people who have experienced homelessness, the average age that they first experienced it was age 19.6. So that's really interesting information for our libraries. I'll pause here. Any questions, Jessica?
Actually, a good one just came up. Does AHS provide an outline of the scope of the survey? Like how many people responded to those surveys?
The Alberta Health Survey?
Yes.
Now, this was conducted in 2014. It has information here about how the survey was conducted, and I didn't delve into the details of the survey, like how many people it surveyed or anything like that. Those are all very good questions.
I guess just having worked with census data and surveys for many years in a previous position, I would say it's highly unlikely that that kind of info isn't available if we, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to dig for it.
Yeah, and I only found this website last week, so I didn't have a ton of time to dig through it, but I thought it was really, really interesting and impactful data about our communities, and definitely things I would want to know. But yes, you would want to know about the sample size. I'm not sure how many people this went out to, but it says here, it says hover over to see detailed information. So yeah, it doesn't say the sample size. So you could probably look up the Alberta Community Health Survey online and find all that raw data like you could for Stats Canada. Here it's just kind of compiled in a nice infographic for you. Any other questions?
No, that's all there is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that was one of the more exciting things I found. If you can bear with me being excited about a presentation that's mostly about statistics, but we'll move on. So here are the screenshots I took. I'll just skip through these. I just wanted to take them in case that website didn't work for me. And please be patient with that website. I can only imagine if you're on a dial-up connection, it's probably not fun to access, but try your best. So the next section is inventory study area features. Now this is a very fancy name for walking around your community and looking at the services and features of that community. So you're going to want to walk around. You've probably done this already. You're going to want to identify major facilities, rec centers, clinics, social services, religious facilities, and educational facilities. So both like elementary schools all the way up to post-secondary. You are going to want to identify major businesses, employers, or sectors. Again, you probably know this if you're not new to your community, you would have this information in your back pocket already, but it's a good way to orient yourself if you're new to your position. And again, for identifying major businesses, employers, and sectors, your Stats Canada focus on geography is going to help with some of that information. And then finally, you're going to want to identify major tourist and cultural attractions in your community and the surrounding close area. And again, another great resource for this will be the municipal and county studies already conducted. Again, like for Parkland County, there was a study very similar to this topic already conducted that when I was helping them with some plan of service work, we were able to look at already. So snoop around on the county or municipality website, you might be able to find some treasure there. So at the end of all of this, you're going to create your report. Your summary can look however you want. It can be an Excel document like I have in the attachments. It could be a report that you type up or a table you create in Word, whatever suits your needs. The important thing is that you have this information so that you're well prepared for community meetings, for advocating for your library, for planning for your programs and your work. The important thing is to keep this updated. So yearly you would want to do some minor edits, but the big updates would come when you're doing a new plan of service or when new census data is released. Those would be times to really, really look closely at this and see what has changed. So once you create this report, how are you going to use it? It's going to take a lot of effort to create it. We have time now with the pandemic. This is also a good report or a good project if you have an intern or practicum student. They could certainly gather some of this data for you. But how I would use this report in your situation is, first of all, I would use it for planning for programs. So I'd use this data to plan or justify new programs according to demographics. So looking at who's served and underserved and really allowing that to help guide my services and programs. I would also use this for staffing. So I would use it to adjust job descriptions and recruit staff with skills to meet your goals and to serve the demographics of the community. So some ways this might affect your staffing is you might start looking for people who have outreach and programming skills. You might start looking for people with language skills. if you have a large minority group in your community and you're not seeing them in your library, it might be because it's very intimidating to go into that space that's full of people who don't look like them, and for whom that communication is going to be a struggle. I lived for a long time in another country, and conducting your life in a second language is incredibly exhausting. So having those language skills on staff would be a huge asset. You might look for staff who have community connections, so connections to particular minority groups or religious groups or things like that, that could bring people in who are not coming into your library. And it might cause you to adjust education requirements. Do you need somebody with one type of background? Do you need somebody with maybe a bit of a social work background for some of the patrons you're serving in your library? Or for some of the patrons who aren't coming in, who you would like to come into the library? Okay, some other ways to use the report. All of you know that one of my passions is collections, so I would use this report to plan for needed collection development or promotion, especially when we're looking at that community health piece. That's why I thought that demographic data was just so great, because there's the health section of your nonfiction collection, or at least a portion of it, right? You could really look into that and see what's needed, what kind of information is needed. And then you could also use this report for advocacy. So it will, referring to the report, making sure your board has seen your community profile, making sure your other staff have seen it, bringing it to community meetings. This will demonstrate your engagement in community needs and issues. And it will show your municipality that you are an equal partner and player with other services, that you're aware of the needs of the community, and that you're willing to work together to work with your community. So that's the end of my presentation today. Just a short one today, but still a lot of information. So I didn't want to overwhelm too much. We can stop here for some questions. I know for some of you this was probably more common sense than anything, but I hope you got a couple of websites out of it that will be interesting for you to visit. Any thoughts or questions, Jessica?
Just a comment that just came in here, that directors and managers might be really interested in something like this.
Yeah. This would be, the process of making the community profile might be better for a director or a community librarian, but the community profile itself, I think, would be really helpful for staff to look at, especially if there's turnover in staff positions or turnover in a director position. It would be so handy to have that on file, give it to the new director, allow them to orient themselves a little bit to the community.
Absolutely. And as a former library manager, I would use the community profile as part of my onboarding of new staff. And it was required reading for all staff to get to know the community a little bit before they really started working with them. No other comments here or questions. And I see you have a template in here as a handout.
I can open that up quickly since we have time. I have it right here. I just whipped together basically, if you were to go to those different websites, just a little Excel spreadsheet where you could pop these things in. Oh, that's why this looks funny. Okay. Yeah, so I basically went through, oh, something has happened here. This did not used to look like this. There we go. Oh, we're missing a sheet. That's why. Sorry. My Excel expertise here. Yeah, so the first tab here, I literally just went through the focus on geography and made little headings for the different areas of things that I thought maybe you'd want to include. You could definitely include more than this. So I put a link here to the focus on geography series. Scrolling down, I put a link here to the prism mapping, and then some of the things you might want to pull out of that. This isn't the community facilities and services is intended if you're doing a walk around of your community. You can make a list of the things you see here. Obviously, you're going to want to put in more rows if there's more to see. I put in a little tab for partnerships. I'm sure that many of you have some kind of way of keeping track of your partnerships and meetings already. So this was just more of a reminder to do that. Again, really helpful with staff turnover and really helpful when you're able to, when you need that information, it's right at your fingertips. And then the last one for community issues and attitudes. So from that Alberta Community Health Dashboard, just pulling out the risk factors. The screening and immunization, I didn't show you guys that tab, but it is also really interesting. It talks about how many, or it shows statistics for how many people attend those different screenings and receive that information about things like breast cancer, cervical cancer, those sorts of things. So might be interesting for you to know in case you want to bring somebody in as a speaker or something like that.
Yeah.
More
Yeah, a couple comments, just a couple of comments that have come in, Lena. One person who said that a profile like this is great for staff to read, not only to get to know their community, but it can help with readers advisory and suggested reading as well. And then another comment here, thanks Lena and Jessica, I agree that it would have been a great training resource and would be helpful for collection development. I wish I had had access to community profile when I had moved to my library to start my position.
Great feedback, and no better time than the present. That's how I feel right now.
Yeah.
I know we're all gearing up to possibly open our libraries again, but you know, like I said, this is a great project if you have a student or intern who can look up some of this data, or you know, if you yourself as the director look it up, then it's kind of cemented in your head a little bit better. But I know these things take a lot of work, so.
Great data that can be included in portions of it included in an annual report as well, as part of justifications for any action items associated with your strategic plan. So if you're trying to justify why you're doing something and you're able to link it to data that you might have found as part of your community profile, you can just make a much stronger case to your board and to your community with this kind of information too. So like, as we've all pointed out, so many uses for a document like this. Are you there, Elena?
Yes, I'm still here. I see some people are having difficulty with Prism. It is a little tricky to work. You have to make sure you have Flash enabled and that you're using Google Chrome. If you don't know how to enable Flash, just Google how to enable Flash in Google Chrome, because it is kind of a bit of a process. And then you have to do what I did. You had to click on that little lock and click for Flash allow. You might not even have Flash installed, because a lot of browsers aren't installing anymore because it's going to be discontinued in December. So like I said, on Thursday, they're giving a webinar about what this is going to look like after Flash is discontinued. So interesting to do. Don't give up.
Yeah, and Lane is only showing you the free portion of this website. So lots of great stuff on this Prism website for sure.
You might also have to refresh or reload the page if you've just enabled Flash by clicking this little refresh button or allowing it to refresh. It is a bit frustrating. It took me a couple goes to get into it. This is what happens as technology ages, but hopefully the newer version of this will be a bit more user-friendly. All right, well, I don't see any more questions, but if you have anything, please feel free to reach out. We'll call it a day. Nice, quick, short webinar for your afternoon compared to some of our longer ones that we've offered. And there's going to be a little survey at the end of this webinar, so please feel free to fill that out. Let us know what you think. We do have another webinar. I see in the questions another webinar coming up next week. Our next week one is actually going to be presented by the staff from Spruce Grove Public Library, and they will be presenting on some of their very successful virtual programming that they've offered during this time. So I think it's going to be a can't miss. And yeah, we'll send the link out in the, maybe we can get it into today's update. What do you think, Jessica?
Yeah, I'm just responding to the question. Yes, we'll pop it out in today's update with from Carla.
But yeah, if you don't get it, feel free to email us and we'll make sure that you get the link. So great. Well, thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you next week.
See you, everybody. Bye, Elena.
Bye.